Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Talking Elite Fitness. Sean Woodland, Tommy Marquez, Lauren Khalil, and Brian Friend here with you today. Hope everyone's doing well. We're going to have a fun show. Got a couple things we want to talk about. So much more normal day. I mean, there's things still happening. There's still talk about the whole the fallout from the thing that happened earlier this week. Dave Castro heading up the sport team and Justin Berg moving on from CrossFit after 13 years. Mm-hmm. And is there anything new? Did anyone talk to anybody? I've talked to a couple people. There's nothing new, though.
Yeah, I haven't heard. I think everybody's just kind of in this holding pattern of figuring out what the finer details of it all are. So I don't think we're in much of a different place than we were a couple of days ago.
Yeah,
at least from what I know.
I tried to get the temperature on people, and it was more the same, like you said. Like, let's wait and see. Not sure what this is going to be. There's a lot of questions, not a ton of answers right now. But as we get more information, we'll pass that along. And we have still, we've reached out to Dave, reached out to Don Fall, hoping to get them on soon. Today, we're going to talk to Jelle Hoste from Europe. He finished fourth there, right? Making the CrossFit Games for the first time. Really, that was a great interview. You and Lauren talked to him. And that guy is Euro Fikowski.
He really is.
He's totally Euro Fikowski.
I love that comparison.
The meticulousness of it all, of how he prepares, and him being an engineer, and like the fine tuning, and then you can tell, and I'm always impressed by this when someone's obviously speaking well in a not their native tongue, because obviously English isn't his first language. He even mentioned that on the back end of our interview. But also in a place where, like, you may not necessarily be required to speak it frequently. That always just impresses me, stepping into and doing a very difficult scenario, like a podcast where there might be a little bit of a delay, like you're not in the same room as the person, so you can't feed off of that and still, be able to go out there and charge. So, like, hats off to him for taking that, because I know that was probably an uncomfortable scenario for him. And I was definitely getting some, like, big Fikowski vibes when, the talking about how he plans out his warm-ups and like the small things in a big way.
And look, if you've been paying attention to our good friend Brian Friend, you've heard about this guy, because Brian put him on the radar. Going into semis, Brian. Yeah, that was the guy that you said we should probably watch for maybe, what was it, one name, one test?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jelle Hoste was amongst a group of athletes that, for a variety of different reasons, didn't get to kind of show the world what he potentially was capable of last season. And coming into this season, I thought there was a chance for him to have some standout performances personally, but also got tipped off by a few people in Europe that are like, dude, this guy is going to absolutely smash test one. And sure enough, he did.
Yeah. So it's a great conversation. And I had this thought, all right, just going to throw this out there. I think Jelle Hoste is the love child of Chad McKay and Brent Fikowski. Now, before you laugh, Brent Fikowski used to live in Australia.
Oh my God.
I'm not okay.
He is the lab grown cross.
Could have happened.
All right. You have to go back and check. Was Jelle Hoste in Australia in 2012 and 13 by any chance?
Yeah, well, I know Brent Fikowski was.
That's like the start of a weird fitness sci-fi film, like The Fly,
Someone look into that.
Yep. Somehow he got confused with DNA from both.
Who knows? Okay. Yeah. All right. A couple things we want to talk about before we get to that interview. As far as from a news standpoint, we talked about it I think it was a week ago, that this is usually the time where news about positive drug tests start coming out from semifinals. CrossFit, of course, waits to release anything until they have gone through the entire process, and I think they usually release it all in one fell swoop. There was a report that FBDV Mayhem out of Africa had a positive drug test, and then therefore they were going to be disqualified from competing, and now we know who that was.
Yeah, Angelique Conaway. She confirmed it on her Instagram, and then it's been reported that, like, CrossFit has confirmed that Cape CrossFit has accepted their invite in the second place team, but I believe it was GW1516, which is
that's that Enduraball, right?
It's either Enduraball or there's one of two SARMs that are kind of the most common thing that keeps popping up, like the metabolites of it. But yeah, so she confirmed it. She's actually withdrawing her appeal. It seems as if, and this is kind of the inclination she gave from the post, is that the only way for her to win the appeal, which is pretty much true, is to go through and get all of your supplements tested.
Mm-hmm.
And then just kind of like our annual reminder for people that in order for that to actually yield an adjusted or abbreviated sanction, you not only have to find, it's not just like, hey, go find that supplement again in an open version. You actually have to contact, you have to be able to find the exact batch number of the supplement that you were using, then go find an unopened version of that same batch of product as well, so that they know that the sealed product and your product were produced in the same batch, and then they will test that sealed product for any contamination. Because if yours is contaminated, then they should be able to find it there as well. That's really the only way. That's how.
And it ain't cheap.
Yeah, it is not cheap.
And which, by the way, is
very
really
expensive.
hard to do and hard to prove. And I don't know if you guys can think of any other athlete, but Larissa Kuna, to my knowledge, is the only athlete who has been able to actually have her supplements tested and
Richard Bolkin.
prove.
So
Yep.
And that was that was what,
2014. So that was actually the very first amended tainted supplement, like proven tainted supplement situation. And we definitely talk about this every year when it pops up. But Richard had a close relationship with that supplement company. The guys that from that company were actually good friends of his and were in his wedding. And they did as companies will do, as you find like off-label supplement providers, they will contract. They will, like, I don't want to say contract distill because it's not spirits and whiskey, but they'll basically contract manufacture supplements for other people for like custom blends or off-label stuff that's not like widely available. And they had picked up a contract for that without telling him. And they didn't like properly clean the machine, so they were able actually to go and find the batch and everything and prove a tainted supplement. And his sanction was reduced to, I believe, a year at that point, because the sanctions weren't as heavily heavily handed down at that point. But yeah, the very first one way back then, and he was top. I think he was like 14th or 16th at the games that year, and that was kind of a big deal. Yeah.
Tommy,
Brian,
do you know if there's any other way to get a 2-year ban than by proving a tainted supplement? Because there are currently 4 athletes, one of which is Larissa Kuna, that are on the banned the banned list that have 2-year sanctions.
I was looking at that yesterday.
Isn't 4 the standard?
Yes. And then it can be reduced to 2 is the most that's
so like Larissa's been super forward about the whole entire process. So it was very easy to follow in her case. It was 4 years. She proved a contaminated substance. It got reduced to 2 years. For the other athletes that are on this list that have 2 years, what I'm not sure of, and that's what I was asking Tommy, is if there's any other way to get a 2-year ban than by doing that.
I'm not aware of any other way of doing that, which is interesting because a couple of the athletes on this list, Pedro Martin's clomipene, which isn't, I believe that's I want to say that's an estrogen blocker. And granted, I'd have to kind of reread up on it, but that's not something that typically shows up in contaminated supplements unless he was able to prove it without a doubt. But those are the what was the other one? It was it's from 2021.
I'm also seeing George Simons Gooding and Achilles Pantasis.
And all of these athletes had theirs reduced to 2, or
that's what I was asking Tommy.
Years?
Yeah, so
the years they were banned, as listed on the document, is 2 total years. They're at, like, for example, this person Achilles Pantasis, they're going to be coming up July 29th off the list after serving for 2 years. What I'm not sure of is if each one of them went through the exact same process as Laurie to get it reduced from 4 to 2.
That's a good question. I don't know.
That is a good question, because I feel like historically Morning Chalk Up has always posted when athletes sanctions are like reduced from 4 to 2 years. So if these other athletes, like if theirs were never reduced, why were they given 2 versus 4?
And I mean, think about the names on the list. Like, Achilles Pontasis is not a Larissa Kuna. It's not an individual CrossFit Games qualifier.
Right.
It might not be as high profile, may not be that active on social media, may not have even announced anything. It might have just happened behind the scenes between them and the CrossFit, and maybe Moni Chukov didn't even know about it.
I think Achilles might be a typo, because if you look at the actual dates next to it, it shows a 4-year window. So it's to his, so I think that might have been a potential typo. The other ones are actual 2 years. So,
the dumb question. This has nothing to do with like the amount, right? That doesn't matter. That doesn't play into it, right? Okay, that's what, just in case people were wondering.
Yeah, one of the common arguments you see online is like, oh, that wasn't enough to confer an advantage. Well, that's
they don't care.
That's anyone who deals heavily in that world understands that the way that people cycle on and cycle off, the amounts that do show up are in very trace amounts, and the way the body processes them, and like the effective doses of these things, and the way that people will try to skirt around it, usually results in very trace amounts showing up in the first place. So it's not a valid argument per se. But yeah, because
the big picture
the other
is
ones
it's
actually
very
show
expensive, and it's very difficult to get your sentence reduced. It has happened. Angelique is choosing not to pursue that option, and they did in fact already invite the backfield team for the second place finisher from Africa.
Did anyone and we were talking about this ahead of time, but did anyone talk about Danielle Hodges, the one that's listed at the bottom here, that the failure to submit a drug test when notified?
No.
So if you go to the list, she's at the bottom. That's the only sanction so far.
This is from last year, right?
Website?
This year, okay. Oh wait, I do remember hearing something about this.
There's a list. You can go to the game site, and there's a complete list of athletes currently serving sanctions. And there's one from this year, Danielle Hodges, from March 19th. And that's for basically failure to submit a drug test when notified. So,
was that a random drug test for her? Because March, that's not, that's during the Open, if anything.
Yeah. Or that's that's in between the Open and quarterfinals?
It was reported on May 15th. Barbell Spin put up an article about it, which is obviously 2 months after the fact of when, and that's the case in point for Sean, is that CrossFit won't release that stuff until everything's buttoned up on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that's something that when we have talked to people previously, Justin Berg, about the drug testing policy, it's that in other sports, right, you can sort of quote unquote dodge a test by saying, "Oh, I'm not available, then can't take it." Right?
Yeah,
and they'll give you like a couple strikes before that happens. Like, do you have a 3-strike rule or something?
Yeah, usually there's a multiple strike rule,
and there's none that doesn't exist with CrossFit. So you don't take it, that's a failed test. That they don't let you.
Decide when you get it.
Right.
Yeah, a missed test is an automatic sanction.
She did go on with him the following day and kind of give her side of the story. So if anyone's interested in that, you can see what she had to say about it too.
Yeah, for sure. And it's and again, like there's people always are like, well, why can't there be exceptions? Because if you start making exceptions, you start giving athletes a way to beat the system. Like there's got to be zero tolerance.
Yeah,
and sometimes that's unfortunate.
And usually people argue for exceptions after the fact.
True. That's a good point. That's a really good point, actually.
There are a lot of people that argue that like there should be zero tolerance and all these things, and then it happens to someone they know.
Yeah, but not for that person.
Yeah. But wait, let's have some reason here. And it's like there's a lot of arguing out of both sides of the mouth there.
All right, the next thing I want to talk about here is that, and this is something I wanted to bring up on Tuesday, but I'm sure people pay attention to social media. People probably follow Tia Toomey. She's back training after like a month after having a kid, a month and a half, and looks phenomenal.
Not very long.
Like she's not human. Okay. This is my whole, I always say this. Some people are just better than you. And Tia is one of them. And so here's the question I have. All right. This is what I want to ask. CrossFit always reserves the right to invite whoever they want to the games. Now you can't tell me right now that Tia, if you give her another month to train, couldn't show up in Madison and do pretty well.
I honestly don't know. I don't know if
you don't think she could finish top 10.
I think it is. I think it is outside of the scope of reasonable assumption to know exactly what her body is going through postpartum.
Get that, but just given what we've
right,
seen in the
like
past.
when I think, on the surface, Sean, absolutely. I want to say that if they invited Tia right now to the game, she would crush it, and she would make all of us wonder, like, where did her genetics come from and how can we get some of those? But then you think of, I mean, I don't think that she's posted anything about, when can she start doing GHDs again, toes to bar, V-ups, anything that has to do with the midline and support. And just from working inside affiliates, I've seen, again, not Tia Toomey's, but other women go through, a long recovery when it comes to using your abs after giving birth. So that would be, with the, I forget what it's called, but when the muscles and your abs separate.
Yeah. I shouldn't make these hand motions.
I know this is the question. Would
Sorry.
you be okay? Would you be okay if CrossFit extended an invite to her?
It's sport. I think that you have to, but then when you get to what our sport is, and people, Granite Games always had the tagline "earned, not given." That's where the waters get muddy for me. But as a fan, to grow the sport, I think that give her a ticket.
Tommy, how many times in the history of the sport have invites been sent out? The absence of earning a spot.
So let's
Hunter
see.
McIntyre.
No, yeah, there was that. There was Ben in 2019. Ben Smith was given one. Then up until 2011. So the first, after coming off of the 2007 games, I believe it was the top 5 didn't have to re-earn their spot at the games. They were given an automatic invite, so they didn't have to actually go through qualification for that. That was true up to a certain point, I think maybe around 2010. Then they switched to a Champions Legacy invite. So if you had won the CrossFit Games, you got an automatic invite. So if you go back like 2011, Rich Froning competed on CrossFit Faith's team at the Central East Regional and didn't actually compete as an individual at regionals that year. So I think that then they switched and they did that. I think after 2011, that process basically effectively stopped, and then it was just Hunter and Ben.
I thought in 2012 they still had the Champions exemption, though, right? Because that was that year that like 9 people went from Central East.
So it wasn't Champions exemption. They just earned an extra spot at their.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So if a champion occupied a spot, an additional spot would open up. So the champion still had to earn, but it didn't take away from other people's champions.
Because I can't remember if it was 2012 or 2013, and it was I vividly remember Tony Budding and Dave Castro up on like our little media platform discussing how many people they were going to take from the Central East, because there was a debate about Marcus Hendren.
Yeah, 2013.
Because you had both.
It was the rope climb.
Well, but you had Graham Holmberg and Rich in the top 5. So they're like, well, are we going to bump it to an extra spot to include Marcus? And they did. And then Hendren went on to finish inside the top 10, right?
So the issue was that most of the weekend Hendren was floating in and out of like the top 5 spots. And typically what it had always been was if the champions finish in a qualifying spot, which is 1, 2, and 3, then you open up the additional spots. Now, Rich obviously won Central East that year. But the question was, hey, if Rich finishes in the top 3, then Graham finishes 4th, and you've opened up another spot for then a champion, does a champion's exemption or champion's allowance, we'll say that, matter the same in 4th versus a top 3 finish? Because now he's getting like a backfill invite, and they weren't sure how to do that.
Yep.
And it wasn't and up until that point, it wasn't guaranteed that Marcus was going to go or finish the next spot below Graham. But then Marcus absolutely torched the last workout. He won that test. He may have set the test record of the fastest time. It was the rope climb, squat cleans with 225. And and then they were just deciding in the back. I mean,
I remember they were huddled up, and then I remember Dave turning away, goes, "Yeah, we're going to take him."
Yeah.
I remember that's exactly what he said.
Yeah, and they didn't. The community and athletes did not know until they walked them out there for the announcement. It was like a reveal at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So and look, I thought it was the right decision at the time, and especially given what had happened the previous year with like all 5 of those guys finishing in the top 10. But I also think it's funny when people are like in some ways they're like, oh, get your shit together, CrossFit, and they look at the past through rose-colored.
I was just going to bring that up.
Rose-colored glasses, and it was like, hey man, like a decade ago, we were still kind of laying the track down as we went, you know. And it's not to say that we didn't do a good job or like the right decisions weren't made, but like,
sorry to interrupt. Wasn't there a case where they actually told the wrong guy he had qualified?
I believe so. That had happened too. I
want to say it was 2013 as well.
Yeah.
And it may have involved Wes Pyatt.
Oh yes, it was Tommy Pease,
right?
In the Northern California regional. They had told Tommy Pease that he had qualified, and then they had to rescind that. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
Could you imagine if that happened today?
That was tough. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But
anyway.
But look, it's
so
it's
is
human
nobody
nature,
pro
right? Like
Southern California, Tommy.
A ticket?
And that
Southern California. Sorry.
And in that year,
would
Wes and Thomas tied on 69 points at the regional. So it was
as
close as could be. And I think that Wes is finishing the final event actually bumped him in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no!
Look, would I love to see Tia at the CrossFit Games, Lauren? Yes, I think it'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
I am not in favor of inviting someone though who didn't earn her way in, and I knowing what I know about Tia, I don't think she'd want to go, not having earned her way in. I think she has too much respect for her fellow competitors to do that.
Okay, Tommy and Brian, before we move on, I want to hear your answers.
What I
go ahead, Brian.
Yes, do you want Tia to get a ticket or no?
One thing that I think is worth acknowledging is that since that time,
killing me.
I'll answer in a sec. I want to hear Brian.
I want to hear Brian. Yeah, go Brian.
Okay.
Since that time period that Tommy talked about, the only time there's been invites was in that 2019 year. And in 2019, it didn't matter at all how many people were there because after 2 days, most of them were going to be gone. So having 1 or 2 extra people in the field was not an issue. The field is specifically capped at 40. So if you invite her, what do you do with an extra person? Run a heat of 1? Do you have a mass start event and cut the bottom person? I think that on the logistics side, it's just not really fair to the 40 that have made it.
Logistics aside, all of the things aside, because it's not going to happen. For the love of the sport, would you want to see a Tia given a ticket?
Well, I don't think it's a responsible decision based on the body. Regardless of how much of a genetic freak she is, I don't think that that's a position that is fair to put someone in this close to giving birth.
I would say no too.
Yeah.
For the love of the sport, I think it's a better storyline if Tia's there with her baby supporting her crew.
Agreed.
And we watch someone else rise into that occasion, and then you have the story, oh wait, Mama's back.
Okay, what if
Time to swing it?
Here's an idea. What if we just invite Tia and we set up a separate lane out in the North Park just for her? Like if you want to go watch Tia, you can just go watch Tia do the I'm going to call it an event. The event at the same time and everybody else. You could set up one camera. You could sell access to it. We call it the Tia Cam.
Oh, I love that.
I mean, right?
Yeah, but she's gonna want a cut of that. It's like
okay, we get a little cut, but come on.
Yeah, I will correct myself though. 2013, an additional invite was given out to Kristen Clever. She finished 4th at Southern California Regional that year. Did not qualify because she was a past champion. They extended her an invite anyways to the games. So that one popped in my head after the fact, but that was the case. So that would be the last time besides the 2019 that someone was officially invited that didn't qualify.
And all of this question was just so that I could have the chance to say that I still believe there's nobody better in our sport at recalling the past when it comes to competition than Tomas Marquez.
It's Mentat Tommy Marquez. Like you don't see it, but his eyes kind of roll up and it's pretty cool.
I painted another layer of my my irises on the bottom side, so my eyes roll back. It's also you can't tell I'm napping.
Yeah, because I tend to remember, like I remembered them doing that. Like, oh yeah, it was this person. But yeah, I always love this. I just serve it up, and you're like, oh yeah, it's. And he throws the ball forcully down through the hoop.
And that's
semi-pro.
Yeah. Wait, no foul. No,
we talking about foul. He was in the air. His pivot foot wasn't moving, so he can't be traveling.
That was a great scene.
Look at Lauren's face while you guys do this.
Now Lauren's eyes have glazed over.
All right. Okay. Well, let's. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get to the Jelle Hoste interview next. So we'll run that here next with Tommy and Lauren talking to Jelle, and then coming out of that, Brian has an article up right now on Be Friendly Fitness that you can go check out about the power of back-to-back events, and we'll talk about that because Jelle Hoste was a guy who actually did very well in the back-to-back tests at semifinals. So here is Tommy and Lauren's interview with the man who finished 4th place at the Europe Semifinal, Jelle Hoste.
All right, now let's welcome in our guest. He's qualified for the CrossFit Games for the very first time out of the Europe semifinal, finishing inside the top 5 and making quite the splash with a few test wins along the way. We're joined now by Jelle Hoste. Jelle, thanks so much for joining us. I know you just got done with your workday. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and let's dive into it.
For sure. Before we get into some of the details of the competition, one thing I wanted to touch on is a little bit of your athletic background. What has kind of made you as an athlete? What sports and activities did you participate growing up that turned you into the athlete we got to see on the competition floor?
Well, the main sport is judo for sure. I practiced judo for 14 years at a pretty high level, but I started off as a kid, I think like basically every kid in Belgium, with soccer, and then transitioned a little bit into running. I also did quite some power fitness, not really CrossFit, but just like the bodybuilding style. But most of that was in function for judo in a later stage.
So of course,
Judo
with
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Tommy.
I got to jump in on the judo stuff as someone who does martial arts a little bit. I'm curious at what some of the carryovers from judo as a sport and competing at a high level that you've seen competing in the sport of fitness, because martial arts are such a fascinating thing in that you're competing on a 1v1 basis. So when you're out on the floor, is there any noticeable carryover for you?
Well, the biggest carryover, I think, is just like having the experience to compete. It's not the first time that I step on the CrossFit floor. That's my first competition. I have experienced like all the, losing, winning, being an underdog, being a high-level athlete that's with big expectations. So being there in all the profiles, let's say, I think, it puts a lot of stress away when I am as a CrossFit athlete on the competition floor.
If we fast forward to last year before semifinals, you were one of the handful of athletes that weren't able to submit their video in on time. We missed out on seeing you at semifinals, but then fast forward to this year, you not only went to semifinals, but you also punched a ticket in kind of this dominant, unassuming way to most of us. Can you take us through, what was quarterfinals like this year, really making sure that you submitted the videos on time, that you had the time zones right, and just like the process from quarterfinals up through semifinals this year?
Yeah, so this year I took it a lot more professional. In some way that it was not even fun anymore. So I read the standards through 3 times. I had a call before every event with Andre. I bought an extra camera. We have the iPad setup, the iPhone setup, the camera setup. So three different angles. The floor plans are laid out 2 hours in front. Every detail was dialed in. Andre didn't let me sleep before I have submitted the video and sent him a screenshot. So everything in our power was like we cannot fuck it up again.
It's nice to have a coach like that makes sure that, everything is in line and almost the safeguard to ensure that you make it to semifinals. I'm curious if you did make it to semifinals last year, is this the version of you that we would have seen? Or do you almost feel like now that all of the cards are on the table, that it was almost maybe like a blessing in disguise that last year panned out the way it did to prepare you for this moment now?
Well, last year it was for sure a tough pill to swallow, and it took some time to get back on the rails because semifinals was like the goal to reach. But actually, it was also just the goal to reach semifinals last year because I missed out few years because of just limitations of fitness. Weaknesses are still too big. So one way I was happy that I made it to semis, and the other way was like I cannot test myself against all the big athletes. But I think it even awakened the fire even more. And like I directly, like 4 days later, when I got the mail from Adrian that said, "Yeah, I'm very sorry, Jelle, you fucked up." Okay, he said it more professional, but basically that's what he told. We cannot do anything anymore from here, and good luck with the rest of the season. And then I was like, okay, next year I'm not just going to semis, but I'm going to semis with a mission. And I lived by that idea for like the rest of the year.
It seems like that was a little bit of a blessing in disguise, as Lauren kind of touched on. I'm curious because in 2020 you also would have gone to the games as a national champion as the national
Mhm.
champion of Belgium, and it seems like maybe the sport has progressed quite a bit even since then. Knowing what you know now, do you feel like maybe even that was a blessing in disguise to be better prepared for your rookie appearance 3 years down the road, given the fact that you did have to wait?
Yeah, in 2020 for sure, because I was like doing CrossFit for 3 proper years, and the workout bars then were like decent, and like I would not attack it the same way as I can attack it now. So, and then you were already a bit games athlete, but maybe let's say the fire would be less big to fight for 3 more years to reach to this point. And I think it can be mentally tough to have to fight really 3 years to reach the same thing.
So what would you say then is the biggest difference from not even last year, but maybe past years up until now, where you not only punched your ticket to the CrossFit Games, but you were inside the cut line by more than 100 points. So you were pretty safe heading to Madison.
Yes, that's what everybody was saying the whole weekend, but until I have it like black on white, then I believe it, because I also believed I did good quarters last year until I checked the deadline. So I take nothing for granted until I'm like even there. Even now I can like walk out the door and maybe a car hit me. You never know.
I want to talk mindset going into semifinals a little bit, because going in Europe, you had the benefit of being the third week. So you got to see a little bit of what was happening in other semifinals and the scores and things that people were putting up. Given what you were possibly doing in testing and how things were running through the events beforehand, was there a moment watching the other competitions where you felt like, hey, you know what? I'm actually going to be competitive here. I think I can do this. And did that benefit you at all?
Um, in terms of mindset, I know what I can do. I know what I cannot do. I know pretty well when I see new workouts how I will finish it. And like 3 workouts I was really excited for. I even talked with Andre and I said like, man, I'm going, if everything is going well, I finish this top 3. And he's like, no, be easy. That's a big expectation. And if you don't hit it, you will be disappointed. You just have to say that you're excited. So then I say, I'm very excited. I'm very excited. But and
So
these 3 workouts that I was excited to test for turned out very good.
So speaking to those 3 workouts that you won, I mean, I personally wasn't expecting it, but I'm sure maybe in your mind you thought that those 3 workouts you could potentially win or have a top 3, top 5 finish, but out of the 3 that you won, was there one that was just a huge surprise when you actually came in first?
Um, well, actually finishing the 3 workouts that I was excited for first was a bit of a surprise. When I was like one of the 3 first, I would be extremely happy. But yeah, apparently I was well prepared and everything turned out good and there were no big mistakes. So yeah, I think it was just about time that everything fell on in the right place at the right time.
And talking about the first event, because you're opening up the weekend, your very first semifinals, and being able to walk away with 100 points is a huge deal. How did that set the tone for the rest of your week? Did that change your mindset moving forward, being able to do that in spectacular fashion?
No, because like every workout, I simulated like 4 times with all different simulations, double volume, heavier weights, whatever. So actually, the whole weekend was just like executing the plan. I had like a plan, a warm-up strategy, eating strategy, everything timed on a minute, where Andre is for sure massively involved. So I know exactly at which minute I had to start the warm-up, what I had to do. I know which paces I could keep. So you never know how it will feel on the floor, but the moment I was on the Echo bike, I was hitting my paces easily on the run also. So I knew it would be, I knew from the simulations if I can keep my paces, the result will be fine, and it felt very good. So no, it didn't change anything. I was just happy that everything went according to plan, because that's not given actually.
That's true. And correct me if I'm wrong. You said you had your warm-ups timed down to the minute. Is that how you typically operate? Is that something new with Andre? Are you that meticulous typically in your training and preparation?
Yeah, normally I am pretty structured, but now we had the advantage that we knew the workout so much in advance that we knew uh, we could basically test every warm up. I know exactly, okay, this warm up for test 1 is 46 minutes. For the test 4 and 5, it will be 36 minutes, and I have to do something in the corrals. When you don't have corrals with the bar, you do this. So there was no surprise there. But actually, when the workouts are more unknown, yeah, it's more like improvisation. And I know also what to do, but it just helps if you don't need to make those decisions on game day. It just leaves more space, headspace for other things that can go wrong.
And kind of speaking to that, having the warm-ups planned down to the minute and this being your first semifinal. Obviously, you've done a lot of the off-season competitions that I'm sure we'll get to in a bit, but this was your first semifinal and it was in Berlin. I unfortunately was home watching the live stream, but from everybody that I talked to, the environment and the arena was just electric. What was that like for you as an athlete, walking onto the competition floor with some of the best athletes in our sport and taking to it? Like, what was that environment like? What was your headspace? What were some of the things that you were thinking about before you went out there?
Yeah, when I'm on the floor, I can like pretty well shield it off, so I don't let to sink it in, or let I don't know how to say, but I just stay focused on what I need to do and don't get too much distracted. But yeah, in the end, like on the 800-meter sprint, there is not much strategy. So then you really hear the crowd, you hear the people shout, you know there are like 50 Belgian people in the crowd. So yeah, there that definitely helps. But
Oh man.
like on the first workout, when it's like strategy, strict to the paces, yeah, if they boost you, it's nice, but you cannot get distracted and run faster. Maybe you will pay it later in the in the workouts.
You mentioned the ability to kind of like zone stuff out and really focus. Do you feel like you've been able to hone that from judo? Because the reality is that if you're not that focused on the person across from you, you're going to get thrown or flipped, or was it ippon the losing point? But do you feel like that has kind of helped you kind of zero in?
Yeah, for sure. Because in judo, it's like much worse. Like now you step on the floor, you know if you make a mistake, you will probably be able to rectify it. In judo, it's possible. Like I had competitions where you got to wait for 2 weeks, you travel for 8 hours, you are there and you are like 10 seconds first step on the tatami, done, you can go home. So that's much harder.
Wow.
Also there, like doing it as sorry.
I was say, did you have any of those 10-second ones? Or like, was that a hard lesson you had to learn?
Yeah, I had it once. It was brutal. It was actually the first international competition in Berlin, actually. Now I remember.
Oh.
And it was the first international competition that my girlfriend and my mother-in-law came to watch me. So they had like a big weekend ahead of sightseeing Berlin.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Then it was
When
not
we
so
look
fun, but
at
yeah.
yeah, like with some of those experiences and just being in the sport of CrossFit, similar to a lot of sports, there's going to be changes, adversity. I mean, we spoke about some of the adversity throughout the past couple of years with missing semifinals, but about a year ago, you switched from mayhem to train with no shortcuts, and you spoke about training with Andre Houdet. And I'm curious what like that experience has been like for you, and why the time you chose to switch was the right time for where you are right now.
When I was a mayhem athlete, I was basically just followed up by Facundo. I was already coached by Facundo before he was already involved in mayhem, but before he had like the proper title of mayhem director of coach. So, but yeah, I was with Facundo for like 3 years, 3 and more years. So it was like my first proper individual coach. But yeah, we are very different personalities. So I learned a lot from that. And after 3 years, it was like, yeah, nothing bad happened, but it's just like I need a new stimulus to get forward. And then I just followed because Facundo said, yeah, if you think you need something else, you try something out, you tell me how it went. And then I found out no shortcuts, and I had like very detailed overviews, weekly overviews, monthly overviews. And yeah, I am very structured, and seeing that as a structured athlete is like, whoa, if if he can turn this in an individual program for me, it's like what I'm looking for. Because Facundo was more like, here's your program, you're the athlete, you do it. And I was a lot like, why I'm doing this now? Can I not do this more now? Or is it the time to build strength? Should I not spend more time on my weaknesses? And yeah, with Andre, I feel like I can discuss that a little bit now. He, how do you say, anticipates a lot on my input. And yeah, just the match in personalities is like a huge difference. Although I learned very much from working with Facundo, is like 180 degrees of what I am, and I liked him a lot as a coach and as a friend. So yeah, it's just I think a step in the process.
What was it like having Andre as your coach, but also he wasn't your direct competitor, but both of you were there to compete. So how did you and him communicate and balance that athlete to coach relationship?
Yeah, Andre is basically in January. I already knew like what I was doing on February, March, April. I basically had my whole schedule until 2 weeks out because then we know the workouts 3 weeks out, and he's like dialing in, like checking up with me like every other week, until the point at semis that he said, yeah, at this point you will not need me anymore. Like, you did everything, you checked all the boxes, you will be confident, you have your warm-ups, you have your deloads, you have your meals checked. So yeah, he just, on the competition floor, he just came like after each workout. How was it? Good. Okay, it doesn't matter anymore. Next workout, 0-0. And it's like, he's not there like as my wife or something. It's just like he's the coach. He says what was good, what was not good, and make sure I forget fast and move on to the next stage.
We've talked a lot about the successes and spectacular moments with the test wins, but throughout the weekend, were there any low points or moments where you felt like it was a major obstacle for you that you had to overcome that maybe we didn't see in the broadcast or see behind the scenes, or you wouldn't necessarily get just looking at the leaderboard?
Yeah, if you look at the leaderboard, you will see it for sure. Like, Linda didn't went to plan. Like, strategy wise, I did my strategy, but I got no reps. I still don't know 100% why I got the no reps. In terms of my ass shifting on the bench, or like my dumbbells who stopped and didn't end up in a fluid movement. So yeah, but that's basically screwed my strategy. If you have to break the dumbbells, you have to go down, you have to do a half bench again, and yeah, there I was not so happy about the execution and the mental performance. But yeah, once it's done, it's done. You cannot change it anymore. So you better move on, and yeah, like 5 events to go.
We alluded to, some of the off-season competitions that you were able to do last season, Madrid, the French Throwdown. I'm curious, like, did you have a checklist of specific competitions that you wanted to accomplish? Like, did you look out in your whole entire year? And from the ones that you accomplished or were able to compete at, what do you think was like the biggest takeaway or benefit that helped prepare you for semifinals, especially as you talk about some of those situations that you might have with a judge getting no repped?
Yeah, in the in the past, I could get very upset with judges no repping me, but I learned the hard way that you cannot change their mind when you're on the floor. So you better move on and move forward with the highest standard and hope they change their mind. Once the judge sees a no rep, I think he's like even more microscopic in seeing the no reps. So yeah, only thing you can do is keep calm, move forwards, do the extra reps, and yeah, just swallow it.
Is there any one of the benefits, I guess, of having a coach that's also an athlete is, Andre has a tremendous amount of experience on the competition floor for situations like that. Is there anything else from Andre's athletic experience and competing on the floor that he's been able to kind of transfer over to you, or reframe your mindset and how you approach it?
Yeah, a lot of things. I'm just thinking about one which is fresh out of my mind, but it's for sure a huge advantage to have a good coach who is a good athlete as well, because all the volume you have to do, all the things you have to do, sometimes it looks ridiculous, but he's doing the same. So yeah, he will not fool himself, of course. So I know everything is with a purpose. I know everything is doable. So yeah, that changed a lot mentally.
Well, and with that, there's so much that needs to be planned and sorted to get to the level of athlete that you are now. But something that I think is incredible is that you're also a full-time engineer. And we see that with a select few athletes, that they're able to kind of balance this work life with being a professional athlete, like Pat Vellner, Emily Rolfe. But what is like the secret to balancing a full-time career as an engineer, nonetheless, and punching a ticket to the CrossFit Games?
Yeah, the answer was already in the question. Balance, I think. So, yeah, the first 5 years of my CrossFit career, I did it full time. I didn't train a lot less than now, but the only thing was like I didn't get enough of sleep. My food was not super dialed in. It was like the quick food, sometimes not enough. Yeah, that was like the biggest struggle. I thought it was like, yeah, I have to get up early and it's a mental grind, but if you wake up at 5:30 and you only have like 6 hours of sleep and you put in 5 hours of work a day, it's no secret you will get injured, you will have pain everywhere. So, but I still did it like 5 years like this. And then when I missed out on semis in 2021, I was like, man, I was so close with what I am doing wrong, and I was like reflecting my week, and I say, yeah, maybe if I, because I'm not like the guy who dares to take the big risk. I like to have the stable base. So if I then thought like, if I work 80%, so it's like 4 days a week, I have one day in the middle of my week, like at Wednesday, where I can catch up sleep and where I can prepare my food for the rest of the week. And I felt like a huge benefit in having that extra day off in the week. So then, yeah, like 2022, I said, yeah, I have to go all the way. And then in my terms, it was like 60% of work. So then I have 2 full days of work off. Yeah, and definitely that was the key for me, like just reducing the work, hoping I survive financially, and but still I work 60%. It's okay. It's not that I say I quit my job. But yeah, I think it's in the Belgians' blood to be very conservative and
Yeah, I mean that's fair, but and you mentioned shifting that balance a little bit, and even making some adjustments outside of the gym with sleep and food and things like that. And so as we kind of shift gears, looking forward to the games, what does your training and preparation look like now, particularly on a day-to-day basis, and maybe for a total volume for the week?
yeah. Well, actually, my schedule leading up to semis and now hasn't changed dramatically. We just added in some extra swim again. No, I don't run on the air runner anymore, luckily. Now I can run outside, have the turf sessions. We schedule some specific sessions like kayak, stand-up paddle, prone boards, like just technical sessions. So the overall volume is a bit up, but not extremely, and just like the specialities who needs attention, yeah, when you go to the games. Before that, yeah, you don't have to practice paddleboard when you go to semis. For now, I think.
When do you plan?
Yeah, at least for
For
now.
now. You never really know. When do you plan to come over to the States? Are you going to go like directly to Wisconsin, or are you going to hit a couple places before? What's that look like?
No, I just go directly with the No Shortcuts team to Madison. Um, so I think 1 week before, 24th of July, we all fly together. And then there we do the last prep week. But that's basically the only time we train together. The rest is just at home. I have everything here. I think it would be a hassle to set up a camp with like all the proper specialty material, because now it's already in Europe. It's like not every gym is packed with all the stuff you have. So I'm lucky to have a piece of everything that I need, and yeah, it will be just on my own.
And kind of touching on some of the stuff that's different in your training. You mentioned the kayak, the paddleboard, the kayak, some swimming. Is there anything, knowing what typically comes up at the games, is there anything that you're really excited to test and compete in that's separate from semifinals and the traditional inside the gym stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I'm basically saying it since I start CrossFit. Like, once I get to the games, it will be so much fun because I'm like I think I'm good at like all the things that don't come before you go to the games. Like I like the heavy picks, I like the yoke carry, the farmer carries, the sleds, the things in the water. I like swimming, so you don't do all that fun stuff like in previous stages.
So Lauren's taking notes because we're gonna have some bets down on which ones you're gonna do well at. So she's
Exactly,
taking.
because I'm betting on you now, Jelle.
And a quick follow up to that too is you mentioned that you're very meticulous in your preparation for the warm ups, at least for semifinals, and also not necessarily one to take a risk a little bit sometimes. But at the games, that I feel like that's going to get flipped on its head a little bit. You are not going to have the same amount of time to prepare. You're going to have to improvise, like you mentioned, a little bit more. And there's almost going to come a time where you might have to take a risk on a test or an event to maybe catapult yourself, say, if you're in a heated race or somewhere you're not expected. How are you going to manage that?
That's like for the semis, like I said, it's like a huge advantage to be with Andre because he's also like so dialed in and very mathematical. But like I said, also like Facundo 3 years before, he was like 180 degrees opposite. So he's like very yeah. Sometimes I had strange things that I need to do. Like you have to expect the unexpected, and then I don't have my warm up, so I figured out myself. And it's like, I think it's something I learned a lot from working with Facundo. So I basically had
Nice.
like every week something like burpee pullovers or something. It's why now you see it a few times, but like 3 years ago it was not so common.
So you got a little bit of both from both coaches, a little bit of the very meticulous prepared and a little bit of, I guess in the United States, we call it a curveball, something a little bit different outside of what you're used to that you're forced to kind of adapt to on the fly.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it's also key to success to like have the experience with different coaches, take what works for you, forget what doesn't work for you. And it's it's been a nice learning path so far.
Do you have a specific goal or expectation at the CrossFit Games?
Well, first no, because my goal was to get there, and I was like, I wanted to get there, but I was like not prepared to go there. But now 2 weeks into games prep, it's like, my fitness felt good at semifinals. My body held up very well afterwards, and I think if the workouts are good, my goal is to take at least one event win, and the rest we will see if weaknesses are exposed badly, it will take me away for sure from the top, but at least I can deal some damage where I can or I want to.
For sure. And I mean, get ready because winning an event at semifinals, that's huge. That's announcing, your arrival. But winning events at the games, that can be career changing for athletes.
Yeah.
A great example of that is Brent Fikowski, his rookie year, winning events, and that became kind of a calling card of his game and what people came to expect. And it was a big launching pad for him as a whole. But like realistically though, is there any sort of placement that you would be happy with if we jumped to the forward and you're like, I walked away as the 15th fittest man on the planet, 16th fittest man on the planet? Is there anything where you're like, yeah, that would be sweet?
I think I would be happy with top 20, but like I said, my goal at semis was also like top 11, so I'm always a little bit conservative with my predictions. So top 20 and everything I can take up there, it's good.
Mm-hmm.
I like to be in this position, If I say 30 or 40, who cares? I was never there.
That's what you said earlier, right? You said Belgians would be a little bit conservative, right? So it's a little protective of you. But I got one last question, expanding off of that a little bit though, because you did say your original goal was to make it to the CrossFit Games. I mean, is there any sort of like personal benefit now that you can like look in the mirror and be like, I am a games athlete? Because we do see that a little bit of a personal transformation from athletes when they finally do get that goal and they can look at themselves as a top tier person in the sport.
I don't think I changed as a person. Of course, you have to change a lot of your habits, your life. Actually, you have to start believing that you're a CrossFit athlete before you make it. You cannot, like, it's not that my mind changed in 2 weeks, like, no, I'm a CrossFit Games athlete. It's like, it changed already like 2 years ago. Like, if I want to be one, I have to live like one. And
Mm.
so now at this point, it didn't change a lot. I think it changed a few years ago.
Well, awesome. Well, Jelle, thanks so much for the time. I know you just got home from work and you jumped right on
A
with us
long day.
to chat with us a little bit, but we really appreciate the time. Congratulations again on qualifying for the CrossFit Games. Best of luck going forward, and we're hoping to catch up with you and see some awesome stuff once you get to Madison.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Cool questions.
Big thanks to Jelle Hoste for doing that. Really enjoyed listening to him. And, as I said at the top of the show, I mean, if you do not get Brent Fikowski vibes from that guy, I have never heard of someone rehearsing a warm-up and having it down to the minute of when you need to start before you take the floor.
Yeah. And, that I asked him about it for the games too, and that could be an issue.
Sure.
But at the same time, I hope that in many ways that level of preparation gives them enough space, like through structure, your provided freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
To maybe have a Brent Fikowski type rookie experience at the games, win 4 events, come close to the podium or do something crazy where at least you're going to shake the tree and you're going to factor into some big time races because you're up there stealing points at the top on certain events. I mean, hearing him talk about some of the stuff that he wants to see in terms of like the games style events, some of the longer stuff, the odd object stuff, I can't help but think like, man, I wish he could have done the Capitol, something like that.
Yeah.
Or I've always wanted, because we saw this at Steve Austin's Broken Skull Ranch. When Tommy Hackenbrook was running the show there for a little while, they had to do like a bull in the ring type wrestling thing. I want to see the guy who competed at national level judo just like ippon some people and like hip toss and leg sweep people and just see some people go tea over ass kettle on that.
Oh man, yeah. I bet if Brent heard about that warm up, he'd be like, "Whoa, you need to slow down, dude." Like I thought I was, dang. But I am really looking forward to seeing that guy compete. I think that he will have a lot of success in some events and maybe, take his lumps in others. But I think that he's one of those guys. It's like he's going to provide you with some excitement. Okay. Let's get into a couple more news items we want to talk about, and then we'll get to the article that Brian wrote about the power of back-to-back events at the CrossFit Games. First, we mentioned, Tia at the top and her coming back. And if you've been paying attention on social media, you follow Haley Adams, you may have noticed that it looks like she's back with the Mayhem crew, having some fun training, and that's good for her.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and it's important the way that you said that is having some fun training, and I think that she's been, pretty forward about that. I believe the first thing she said was, "This time it's for me." And it's a really, for her, I'm hoping that's a really freeing thing to say. Whatever you want to read into that. If this time's for her, what I read into that is that in the past, she's been doing it for other people. And I think that it's totally fine to want people to appreciate what you do. But if you feel like whatever it is you're doing is for someone else, there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. And if it's doing something that you're doing for yourself, there's a lot of freedom in that. And I'm hopeful that what she's projecting is what's actually her truth, which is that this is her making a decision for her to get back into training with some people that she clearly has, some fun and good relationships with. She's put out some kind of fun stories and stuff with Guima Eros. And if that's the case, I think that that's great, because I know there's a ton of people that are huge fans of hers and would love to see her not just doing this, but doing this and having fun while she's competing.
Yeah. And I think the bigger picture for me is like seeing her able to be in a gym environment that doesn't necessarily need to be competitive for her right now. She can just go in there, have fun. She was calling no reps on gi and laughing about it. And I think sometimes that's just what you need to get the love of the sport back. And if that leads to, us seeing her be competitive again next year, that's great. But if this is just maybe her new norm is just going in there and having fun just for herself, I think that has to be fine too.
Yeah. And one thing, like, Brian mentioned about like doing it for me this time. And sometimes it's not always that maybe she was doing, and we'd have to talk to her more about this, but like sometimes the pressure can also be not necessarily doing it for people other than myself, but you're doing it in a way because you're projecting out what you think you're supposed to be versus like who you really want to be. I swear I'm not trying to do this, but this is just how my mind thinks. Like you think of in Endgame when Thor's like talks to his mom. Yeah. She's like, you're going to fail at trying to be who you're supposed to be. Right. Like the measure is succeeding at being who you actually are. And I think that's like, granted it's shrouded in superhero stuff, but I think it's a poignant, bit of advice.
Yeah.
If you weren't aware, there are some very valuable life lessons in the Marvel universe too.
There you go.
Exactly.
Actually there is. Well, I could totally go off on a
absolutely there are, and I think what Lauren said is also super important because, in addition to obviously being a great athlete in this sport, Haley's a young woman that I think has had a big impact on a lot of other young women who are interested in this sport or pursuing this sport or just interested in being healthy in their lifestyle. And the whole dynamic of what's existed with regards to that this year with several, prominent athletes, if she's able to come back and be training in a healthy manner, there's a lot of people that can look at that and hopefully take some of that away and apply to their own life in pursuit of health and fitness.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that I like the best too is like when if you watch those stories that she posted, there seemed to be some genuine laughter there. Not, and that's always good to hear. That always puts a smile on my face. So, other thing we wanted to talk about is what's going on with the LATAM Cup.
Yeah,
with Wodapalooza.
Yeah, Wodapalooza made the announcement. Like a couple weeks ago, maybe. I think it flew under the radar, maybe just a little bit, but I think but basically, they're adding another element or another layer to their competition in Miami. So it's called the LATAM Cup. They're gathering 20 athletes from the best events in Latin America to crown a champion live at Wodapalooza Miami next year. They'll compete Thursday and Friday in the LATAM Cup division for those spots. It's kind of like a completely independent division with RX level standards and performing the same workouts. It's pretty cool that they're doing that because the way that it works is they're pulling from all these other competitions that are already taking place in Latin America from different countries. So if you go to the website, you can see like Wadstock Fitness Festival in Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Guatemala, Venezuela, and Argentina. And then there's going to be even more as they start to fill out that roster of competitions. But it's pretty awesome that they're doing that. I think it's Wodapalooza has always had, I feel, their finger on the pulse of the Latin America community, being in Miami, a city that is steeped in that culture. So I think it's cool that they're adding that in what is clearly like a rapidly growing community down there.
And Loud and Live in general has been kind of forward thinking in terms of ways to collaborate across competitions. They were part of the IOQ when that came out during sanctional seasons to some degree, and they have had these opportunities in the past. I think that the Zelos game winners got invited last year, and actually several of these competitions that will directly feed into the LATAM Cup, their winners were invited to Wodapalooza last year in the Black Challenge, I think the Argentina Throwdown, and some of those athletes actually did quite well. I think the men in particular, they had, I think, 4 guys finish like in the top 22 or something out of a 38-person field from those competitions, several of which then went on to compete in the South America semifinal this year. So they get to, first of all, earn their spot through a competition locally, go to a internationally well-known competition like Wadapalooza, take the experience from there, and then go and compete at semifinal level. So they've already been kind of laying the groundwork for this. I think it's a great next step forward. And I talked to Dylan, and he had said that, like athletes, like some of those guys who already had kind of earned away this year, if they want to, get into the main field, obviously they can still do the qualifiers and get in. And if they get in through both, then they can choose which one they want to do. So it's not limiting in any way. It's another path for people to get onto a big stage and compete, by doing something locally, earn an opportunity to do something kind of globally.
Yeah, it's a good point about Loud and Live, because like their other business, like the music side of it, is all Latin music and producing Latin music concerts and events of that nature. So it kind of fits right now. I just want to see them blend the two. Maybe get a big Latin artist to come perform on that Saturday. Maybe get Brian out there dancing to some Peso Pluma.
Oh yeah.
Fun
I
fact.
don't even know what
fact.
that is.
When I was living and working in the Dominican Republic, I was the male representative to teach the volunteers the bachata and the merengue, but I did not take the lead. The expert female.
Is there video
Dominican
footage
woman.
of this anywhere?
I really highly, I know for a fact there's not, but I did get up in front of several thousand college-age women over a period of 18 months and do the bachata and merengue as the second. The woman did the lead.
Second, yeah.
Hey. Okay, this is going to happen.
That's a great fun fact.
We're going to find someone out there listening right now knows how to do those two dances. We got to do this at the games, right? If we can get the games, we'll do a dance exhibition. Maybe we'll do it before the Tia lane. Before Tia takes the field in her lane, we'll have Brian Friend out there as a halftime entertainment.
Sean's never been more impressed with you.
That's incredible, dude. Listen,
all the stats you've given, he was so impressed with the fact that you went up there and danced.
If you have never, so I got roped in when I lived in Jacksonville. I got roped into, it was when Dancing with the Stars was big. I got roped into like a local version of that.
Oh God!
If you've never. See, right? That's typical local TV. Hey, we should take something that's really good on a national level and do a really bad version of it. That's a great idea. My station even did a thing when American Idol was huge. They're like, we're going to do our own local one.
Oh, heck
and it was
no.
In Florida.
That's where I would draw the line.
It was. I'm like, who is saying yes? And they did it, and they called it "Give Me the Mic."
News directors,
and they, how mic, as in microphone, is spelled M-I-C. They thought that was too confusing, so they spelled it like the name. Give me the M-I-K-E. Oh,
what?
Local television, ladies and gentlemen.
That's bad.
Yeah. So, but anyway, if you've ever tried to learn one, and I'm relatively athletic, but if you ever tried to learn like one of those dances, it is not easy. Like it's so good on you, Brian. I'm impressed by that. All right.
I love it.
That concludes the
more you know
culture portion of the show.
Yes, our culture.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to the article that Brian wrote here. The power of back-to-back events at the CrossFit Games, because we thought this was a sort of a good place to go after talking to Jelle Hoste. And Brian, I'll let you sort of summarize what's in here and why you took a closer look at the importance of back-to-back events or the power of them at the CrossFit Games.
Yeah, so obviously this year at semifinals, we had a back-to-back events with tests 4 and 5. Actually, in the preview to semifinals, it was something that I had done an article with J.R. Hall and Taylor Self. We'd all kind of thrown out some things that we were either expecting or hoping to see. And I said, at this stage of competition, I think that there's a big difference between having 7 tests and 6 tests. And an easy way to add an extra test is to do a back-to-back. I don't think there's necessarily a need for one every single year. This year we had it, and there were some incredible performances on those that actually led to people qualifying to the games. So I use this as kind of the framework to talk about what could potentially happen if we see back-to-back event at the games. It just so happened that there were 6 athletes at semifinals this year who will be rookies that earned a significant percentage of their overall points on those tests, 4 and 5, Jelle Hoste being amongst them. And so I was in that mindset thinking, well, there's some that come to mind as being very obvious home runs in a back-to-back at the CrossFit Games. And those athletes generally did pretty well overall relative to the other performances in their career in those cases. The ones that were like really, really present in my mind were Willie George, bicouplet 1 and 2 in 2018, and Spencer Hendel pedal to the metal 1 and 2 in the finale of 2015, both of which produced their career best year. So knowing that, I kind of set out to look at what were, all or most of the back-to-backs that we've had over the history of the CrossFit Games, and were there any other athletes who also excelled in those? And what I'm kind of meant by that was that they earned a high percentage of their total points relative to the total percentage of available points in those tests en route to a great performance in their career compared to other years that they've been at the games. And it just happened there were also 6 people that fit that bill. And so the article kind of wrote itself from there on.
Okay, so 6 people who fit that bill at semifinals, or 6 people who fit that bill at games?
Both. 6 rookies this year who had great performances on back-to-backs.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was talking about
games for the first time, and 6 people.
Okay, I was talking about
throughout
looking
the history
back
of the games that did great at a back-to-back in the year that they also had their best career finish at the CrossFit Games.
Okay, So some of the, I want to talk about the ones, the events that you picked to look at the games. So you mentioned bicouplet 1 and 2. You picked, I think, Pendleton 1 and 2, row 1 and row 2.
Pedal to the metal 1 and 2.
That's right, pedal to the metal 1 and 2.
Yep.
Why didn't you pick because just looking at one?
Well, and in the case of Rebecca Voigt, the end 1, 2, and 3 from 2011.
Yes. So what about?
I looked at.
I'm curious, like why you didn't
more.
Oh, you did. Okay, so what are some? Because the one that jumps out to me is the skills. Or sorry, not the skills. It's the 3 that were back to back to back in 2016. It was handstand walk, suicide sprint, and the plow.
So I didn't look at those, and I didn't look at the skills because they were 50-point tests. And what I was looking at here was specifically when they were back to back and 100 points available each. That ends up being a much more significant percentage of the total available points.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the document open here, but there were maybe a dozen events that I kind of picked out. And then as I was looking through on the men and women of each, some of them just didn't produce examples that were that fit this category. But there were enough that were where they had a significant percentage of points earned and produced their best career performance. And in some cases, it was like twice as good as they'd ever done before or after. Mm-hmm. And then finally, anytime I do these studies, I always try to think about, well, what does it mean? And it means kind of and for me, it meant 2 things. One is for the athletes, and one is for the people who are programming any competition, really. If you're going to choose to have a back-to-back, understand how powerful it can be in terms of kind of swinging the tide of a competition, and therefore to be pretty intentional about what you're testing for there. Because in some cases, like Pendleton 1 or 2, row 1 or 2, bicouplet 1 or 2, more or less the skill sets being tested, or at least the movements being tested, are very similar or the same. So you're like doubling down on that. And at the semifinal, a lot of people had this perspective. It's a run snatch and a snatch run, therefore it's the same. And there were other people that said, well, the heavy lift and the fast run is not really testing for the same thing, so they shouldn't be considered doubling down on the combination of running and snatching. So you could have a little bit of an argument there. Either way, if you're the programmer and you're choosing to have a back-to-back event, understand what those 2 things are testing for. And if they are testing for something similar, I think that you need to make sure to offset that with enough other events in the competition, because it can be super influential of the overall leaderboard.
So let me ask you this. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying the most effective way to program, if you're putting it on a test, on an event, back-to-back events, is to make sure they're testing for a divergence of things. You want a variety of stuff in there. You just don't want sort of rinse and repeat. You want, and I think that's why Adrian Bosman, when we would meet with him in production meetings at the semifinals, would say, keep an eye on tests 4 and 5, because if you do well in the first one and then you come back in the second one, you're legit. Because in his mind, we're testing for a variety, like 2 different skill sets here.
And it also, and Brian touched on this in the article, it adds another element of recovery as a fitness factor, or a fitness multiplier, or whatever you want to call it, that you don't necessarily get in other traditional layouts. So the ability to, apply your fitness in a maximal way or some sort of maximal way, recover and do so again in a way that's effective with a different test under different circumstances too.
Yeah, and to Sean's question, I think that understanding what the competition that you're programming as a whole is important. In a 7-test competition, like we had at semifinals, if those two things were redundant in what they were testing for, that could potentially be a problem. In a 15-test competition, maybe not as big of a problem because you have plenty of opportunity to offset it with some other things. But if you introduce cuts to the equation, there's another level of this that you have to account for, which is to make sure, because it's not, I don't think that in the case of a back-to-back workout that's testing for something that's very similar, that it's just 200 available points in a vacuum. Like there's a certain amount of momentum and other things that you can't necessarily measure with numbers that come with doing great or poorly on that. I mean, if let's say you're sitting 10th overall at the CrossFit Games, you come to a back-to-back event and it's just testing the same thing that you're not very good at, and you take 2 bottom 10 finishes, you could drop 12 spots in 10 minutes. And how does that affect the rest of the competition? And so if there's a cut following that, you might be like, oh my God, like literally the one thing I'm bad at was just tested back to back at the worst time of the weekend. So there's a lot of nuance to what the programmer should be considering if they choose to have a back to back. And I thought this was just a kind of a cool opportunity to throw that out there because, programming in general is a hot topic in CrossFit right now. There's a lot of great minds that are weighing in on it. And I was hopeful, honestly, that some of them would see this and maybe, have some conversations about it, especially if we end up getting a back to back at the games this year.
Yeah, and it brings up a couple of cool things to consider. I mean, one is what those back-to-backs look like and have looked like historically, given what was laid out both from these rookies and the games vets, relative to the competition, right? Because as the capabilities and abilities of the fittest athletes evolve, so does the test to meet that. So seeing some of these kind of back-to-back events played out in very different fashion, whether it's 2011 when we had the end, you had the row in 2013, the pedal to the metal in 2015. You even had ringer 1 and ringer 2 in 2019, although that was with an abbreviated field of just 10, so slightly different. But even some ones like in 2016, we had test 3 and 4 that were back to back at regionals that year that were absolutely brutal. They were both. One was a much shorter test, the other one a little bit longer. And it kind of touched on some of the things that we saw from here in that if you were smart, and especially for some of these young athletes, it can reframe how you approach a competition if you know that, hey, in terms of bang for my buck in time and energy and efficiency, and I'm really going to sell out one place on the weekend or maybe even take a chance, this spot where taking a chance within a short window can potentially yield so many more points overall, can kind of guide your perspective from there. Because you hear from some of these athletes that are like, hey, at some point, I'm going to have to get outside of my comfort zone and go for it somewhere. I'm going to have to pick my spot. It's something you hear in sports all the time. You got to pick your spots, right? I mean, picking your spots for a 200-point event for something that, whether it's to try and gain a ton of points or B, maybe try to do a little bit better job of damage control by laying it all out there because it's going to hurt regardless.
Sean, while Tommy was talking about that, I was able to pull up my notes so I can give you some of the other ones that I looked at that didn't produce exactly these same things. Thick and Quick into Double Grace, 2014.
Just going to mention that. All right.
Yeah.
Cinco 1 and 2, 2013. Elizabeth into Isabel and DeFran, 2012. The Final 1, 2, 3, 2010. Ringer 1 and 2, 2019. And the other thing that's worth mentioning is as I was looking through all of these, there are a lot of examples of people like Rich Froning and Tia Toomey dominating back-to-back or back-to-back events. But they were athletes that were regularly dominating a lot of things and were producing great results over the course of their career. Whereas the ones that I selected here, while they are in many cases regular participants at the CrossFit Games, they had never had a year like that in their career. And it also just coincided with being exceptional at a back-to-back event.
Yeah, in 2011, definitely 2012, they made cuts after each one of those 3 girls too. So it was like they did the first one, they kept athletes out on the floor, they announced cuts, people gave their send off, and then they're like, all right, line up and do this next one. and it was,
Yeah.
so it was a much less structured, like, time recovery. Like, I specifically remember like them like Azadeh Borman got a nice pop, like, as she was announced, like, hey, you finished 18th or whatever, like, we're making the cut now to 15, and like I'm thinking like, wonder how much time this rest is here.
I used to drive like the
truck,
the TV truck, and the Bruce like, where are we going? What time? Like, how much longer do we have? It's just, that was always fun. So we use the winning a semifinal. You had that article. How does that do in predicting your success at the games? So if you're going to go now, let's go back to the semifinals, and you're going to look at back-to-back tests and how you perform in that. Assuming, I think the caveat here is that if you have a back-to-back test that looks like you're going for two different things, it's not just we're doing it once and then we're going to just go do it. We're going to reverse order, so it's more or less the same thing. But if you have two back-to-back tests that have enough of a variety there that you're program or that you're searching for, two different skill sets. If you find athletes that do well in that setting, what I'm guessing is that is someone that you should be paying attention to moving on, because that is exhibiting something where you can do, you can have a quick, powerful output followed by maybe a longer test, and you can do well in both. Plus, you can recover in between the two. Those seem to be very good indicators that you're a fit individual and that you will do well moving on to the games. Is that more or less the way you see it, Brian?
Potentially, but the counter argument to that would be, we'll just take Abigail Domit for example, because she earned the highest percentage of points relative to her overall points in these events, which was 40%. So 40% of the total points that she earned across all 7 tested semifinals came from the snatch and the run combo. That's out of an expected 28.5%. So she's like earning 11 or 12% more than expected on those compared to the other tests, which means she's earning a lower percentage on the other things that were tested. So what else was tested? High-level gymnastics in events 2 and 6. She was kind of below. She must have been batting below average on those things to be batting so much above average on these. So I think that what this is probably suggesting is that these athletes, you can look for them to have some big moments at the CrossFit Games, but the only exception I would say is probably Jelle Hoste of this list, because he was kind of consistently good on a lot of other things as well. The rest of them, I would expect to have highs and lows.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And kind of to your point, a couple things that you mentioned that I would like to expand upon for sure. Like at the bottom, the only athlete on this list of the games, you mentioned how the power of it can lead to career-defining moments through semifinals or games. Obviously, for semifinals, making your very first CrossFit Games, finally breaking through. For the games, it being your best finish, and you listed out a bunch. I would even argue that from a contextual standpoint, that Kalipa's second place finish in 2013 was actually his best finish of his career.
Given everything that he had to do to get there?
And given the state of play in the sport in general.
I think I'd probably agree with you, because I remember thinking like it was we had row 1 and row 2. Was that we had the pool.
Yeah. We had the pool.
Then we had row 1, row 2.
And then
was it the burden run?
Burden run after, because
he was in first place after those 4 events, right?
He won 3 straight.
Yeah,
and he was actually in first place all the way up until the clean and jerk that year. So the clean and jerk, I believe, is where Froning took over first place overall. Mm-hmm. So he held it for a couple of days, and I just think in general where the competition level was at relative to 2018 or 2008 compared to 2013. And where Kalipa's career arc was at that point, like he had finished 5th in 2009. I think he was 14th or 16th in 2010. He had gotten back into the top 10 in 2011. I think he was like 6th, and then he was like 7th or something, 5th in 2012, I think.
That is so impressive.
And you're sitting there thinking, okay, like Kalipa is clearly one of the biggest guys in the sport, but his only podium came in 2008, right? And it's a different era. It's clearly a different era now. And then he comes out and does that in that back-to-back when so few athletes actually did well in both. Like the thinking behind the scenes going into that row 1, row 2 was hey, I'm going to sell out for one of them.
Yeah.
And which one am I going to sell out for? You know, am I going to go really hard on the first one and then just be okay with whatever happens and see how I go? That's actually one of my favorite quotes of all time is Khalipa talking about that event. He goes, yeah, I felt like I could win the short row. And then I just dropped my pace down to like 150, held it for the next hour. Like it was no problem. But what came out of that, right? Obviously, he finishes second and he ends up podium in back-to-back years to close out his individual career, which I think was really kind of a career redefining moment for him. It forced everyone to ask a question: how did this just human gorilla of a man win this long event, this short event, and win this long odd object event like the Burden Run with this huge change in aerobic capacity when that wasn't always his thing in terms of that energy management? And it basically launched the career within the sport of Chris Hinshaw.
Yep.
It started having athletes take a better look at aerobic capacity across the board outside of the traditional confines of your gym. I mean, you may have heard a couple of people working on zone 2 training and the people that were maybe, I'm really into CrossFit endurance at the time, or, you know, I want to learn how to pose run, but like that just completely shifted everybody's training a little bit. And then suddenly everyone was working with Hinshaw. Everyone wanted to replicate what Jason did, and also Garrett Fisher that year because he was fifth as a rookie. And it was like, oh, that was a huge watershed moment.
Yeah.
And so I think it only kind of bolsters Brian's point in that regard of like, this was an opportunity that was made possible and really kind of opened up a bunch of people's eyes because of the power of that back-to-back event.
And so
Brian,
in row 1 and row 2 specifically, you know, so Sam Briggs did the same thing. She won both of those back to back, and she goes on to win the CrossFit Games last year. She's never been better than fourth in any other year. So even when it comes to great athletes like Sam and Jason, having an opportunity to get a back to back that you can excel at an elite level, and I mean, it's just a boost that's really difficult to replicate.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, in your research here, did you come across a back-to-back, and any of the ones you mentioned that really stood out to you as you look at it and you go, I'm going to hold this up as sort of like the pinnacle of a back-to-back test. Like if you're trying to program something, this is what you should try and emulate, because I think this was the most effective combination.
I mean, that's a great question. I wish that I would have had some time to think about that before answering it now, but I still think that the context of what I said earlier reigns supreme, which is that it just depends how it fits in with the overall programming for the competition.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, in going back and looking up some scores, I really did like the event 3 and 4 on Saturday of Regionals 2016, the one that I mentioned.
What was that again?
It was a 6-minute time cap, 104 wall ball shots, 52 pull-ups.
Oh, yeah.
So basically kind of like daring people to go large unbroken sets. And then you had this 4 rounds of 28 pistols, 15 power cleans. And like I thought it killed Travis Williams back in the day. I remember him like having to sell out because he didn't do as well on day 1 and just like collapsing at the finish line and seeing it. And actually had some results where I felt like it did catapult some people. That was the first year Jamie Hagia qualified, and she qualified in 5th, and she was right on the cut line. Her and Brooke Ents were fighting for that 5th spot. You know, Jamie had an up and down first day, and she had the best 1-2 punch of those 2 tests out of anyone in the women's division for California that year. And that was a huge reason of what kept her in the mix that year to qualify for her first games. Brooke Wells won the first event of regionals that year, bombed the second one, and there was like how is she going to get back into this? She goes 1-2 in those 2 events, and then she was back and running full steam. And it was really kind of a catapult for her to get back.
The Hagia and Ents is a great example of what you often see happen in these things. Jamie goes 7th and 6th. Mm-hmm. So 73 and 75 points, 158 points. Brooke Ents goes 5th and 27th. And you see a lot of athletes. The other thing I did try to look for when I was doing this was to see if there was any athletes that really took a hit, like bad on these 2, and it caused like the lowest performance of their career. There weren't really any great examples of that, so I just tried to focus on the good side of the powerful. I'm sure it has happened, but in that case of Jamie and Brooke, Brooke ends up getting 113 points, so she's getting like 45 points less than Jamie there, and misses the games by 16. So Jamie basically, like, that's where she made the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great recall, Tommy. Right. I'm just blown away today.
Someone had a good breakfast.
Yeah, I ate breakfast. I got my heart rate up. I went back in the files of my brain and did a little cobweb dusting.
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right. Well, it's a cool article, and it definitely brings up some things to think about. And I think you mentioned this too, Brian. Like, if you're someone who is like a programming geek, like there's a lot to dive into here, and try to craft like the ideal back-to-back test. And again, I do like the fact that you pointed out, like, you got to take the bigger context of the entire competition in mind here. So that does seem like a very difficult needle to thread for a programmer, to put together a really good, back-to-back event like this.
I like that you posited maybe including row 1 and row 2 with the bicouplets together to kind of balance them out a little bit. Mm-hmm. Or even like Pendleton 1 and 2, which were Pendleton 1 was effectively more swim and bike based. But
Lauren, do you have a favorite back test that you've watched event?
An ultimate favorite event. Obviously, the marathon row.
Yeah, well, but that wasn't back to back. That was just a slog.
I know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's not the favorite of the broadcast team.
Actually,
I was being so sarcastic.
No, Sean and I had the same. We've talked about this before on the pod. That was because it was 2018, and that was when I felt like we were firing on all cylinders as a unit, and we were kind of going through the process of that event, and we did some because we shot a show for CBS that was like live look-ins, right? It was like sections of it.
I think we were doing that for YouTube.
We did some YouTube stuff, and then we also recorded something for CBS Sports.
There was like a little like a recap thing,
and that we did, and we all kind of like afterwards were like, I think we could have covered that, filled that full 3 hours.
I think
live.
We could have too. That's one of the big regrets. I wish we could have done. That's one of those challenges. Like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, like back to
I was there like kind of working during that for the documentary team that year, but I was watching that event mostly as a fan, and I was like, I'll watch the first half hour. I'll go walk around the site for a while. I'll come back in a couple hours and see what's going on. I never left. I watched the entire thing in the Coliseum, and I was like, yeah, this is entertaining to me.
80 people sitting on rowers, not going anywhere. And that place, there wasn't there were not a lot of empty seats. Like, it was pretty compelling stuff. I was surprised at how entertained I was by it. And one of the crew in the truck started getting punchy, and I remember we had a pass for the lead, and they had that big scoreboard, up. And Mike Roth, our director, gets in my ear. He goes, "Hey, we're going to show the pass. We're going to show the pass. All right, set up the replay." And I set the replay, and I'm like, "Well, here's the pass." And all they do is they show the scoreboard, and they just show the boats go bloop. That was it. That was our big replay. So it was good. But yeah,
could you imagine, like, Brian could have walked in, watched the first 10 minutes, walked to his hotel, watched Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, came back and watched the finish.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Go check that article out. The power of back-to-back events at the CrossFit Games. It's on BeFriendlyFitness.com. Okay, before we go, community support and then crazy things we saw.
Let's see. What did I have? We were talking about this a second ago, and I was just going to talk about community support, and I forgot.
All good. Efforting community support. How much time do you need? I can vamp.
I don't know, because I think
who's got plans this weekend?
We're going to talk about the LATAM Cup for community support, I think.
Oh, okay.
But
so we covered that.
We ended up covering it, so I think we're good. We do have. I can do a quick reminder.
Okay.
On the community support that we brought up just a couple weeks ago. It is the WOD for Mila event. That's July 8th, so we still got a couple weeks to go. But just a reminder. Melbourne, Florida, July 8th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Maverick CrossFit. It is a workout dedicated to one of their members of the communities whose daughter passed at a young age, and anyone and everyone is invited. If you had a pregnancy or infancy loss, they would like to also honor and recognize your baby at the event if you're curious about going too. So you can head to classy.org and look up the Mila, a CrossFit event. It should be able to pop up. You can donate, participate in the workout, or contact them if you want to be a part of it too. So,
all right. Hey, if you have anything that you want us to get the word out on, happy to do it. You can contact us through our official Talking Elite Fitness Instagram account. You can send it to me or Tommy on our Instagram accounts. Be sure to include as many details as possible because we want to make sure that we are sending people to the right spot to either donate or sign up for whatever you have going on. So happy to get the word out, but just send as many details as you possibly can. All right, let's get into crazy things we saw this week. Can't reach the button because of our setup here. Good God almighty. All right. Who's got one? I got one right here. I got one from Stephanie Millinger. She is doing, look at this. She's doing that. Can you guys see that? She's doing like a handstand on a stack of, she's got a stack of plates. And then the other, like the plate she's handstanding on, she has it at a 45-degree angle.
She's wild.
She's keeping her balance throughout this entire process and then has a perfect dismount. No big deal. I'm warm. Let's go work out.
Oh, man.
Try that. I can't even do a handstand, period, let alone on a stack of plates with the one plate that I'm supporting myself on at a 45-degree angle.
That's impressive.
That's my crazy thing. Beat that.
I have one that is I don't know if it's definitely not a good crazy thing. But have you ever seen the page Kook Slams? Yes. Which is
that is one where every time I watch, I'm like, oh, you have that reaction where you just.
This one is so I'll set the stage. It is a guy. They're in Brazil or a Latin America country. He is leading a snake of rollerbladers, all attached at the hip, and he's doing it from like selfie point of view.
Oh dear!
And he's having a good time. He's hanging. You see, all of a sudden, a break in the chain happened, and everybody except for him in the lead goes down and takes a huge digger. And he's filming the entire time.
And he just keeps
going
rollerblading along his merry way. Wow.
So if the lesson from all of this,
don't tether to another person while rollerblading.
Don't rollerblade. Skateboard.
All right.
I used to love rollerblading. Did you guys ever have those sneakers that you could click a button and the rollers would come out?
Oh, I was way after my day.
Oh wait, yes, oh man. I got those for Christmas one year and I was so pumped.
I could just see like little Lauren just like sliding across the kitchen floor
with his foot up in the air. Yeah. No, those are way after.
Yeah, and then I went to Catholic school and I wore them and was immediately sent home that day.
Wow.
Whoa.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah, because in between periods I rolled on by and the nuns
accidentally bumped into one of the nuns and that was that.
Mm-hmm. That was all over.
And the rest is history.
Sister Barbara was
my shirt came untucked and it was a problem.
Can't have that kind of
I know. No.
Tomfoolery.
I think that I think my crazy thing I saw kind of flows nicely after Tommy's. I wouldn't say this is necessarily the most positive thing, but it's one of those experiences where sometimes you're just sitting there and you're watching something happen and you're like, is this really happening right now? I was at my buddy's apartment complex waiting for him to come out, and I was just sitting in my car in another place in the parking lot. I see this vehicle. It wasn't going fast at all, like 10, 15 miles an hour maybe, but I'm watching it and it's heading towards a rock that's as big as the tire. And it just, I have no idea what's going on in the car. It hits the rock and then it bumps and goes over another rock and then it just falls over on its side. And it turns out that there's the dad and the mom and there was a kid in the car. Everyone was totally fine. But I'm just sitting here from across the parking lot watching this happen, thinking to myself, what just happened? There's no one around. Nothing, no explanation from where I'm standing about why this happened. This person just hit two rocks, rolled their car. The car ended up being totaled, I guess, and thankfully everyone was okay.
What? So
and I'm like, that's a crazy thing I just saw.
From your vantage point, could they A, see the rock, and then B, did they have enough time?
Yeah, it was right in front of the car.
to avoid it? Like, because sometimes you see things last second, and it's like I can't get out of the way. Was there enough time
Totally
to
assuming
either
here,
swerve or
but
make
for
some
me,
sort of
this is
evasive maneuver?
I just have to assume that the driver was not paying attention.
Most likely.
Like, I can't
Sorry, I
really
was
assume
Texting
anything
and
else.
driving.
But from my perspective, watching it just happen from across the parking lot, I was like watching this happen, thinking to myself, what is happening? And next, their car went down.
Did it feel like it happened in slow motion?
It did happen in slow motion.
Like, I feel like anytime you watch something, you're like,
God.
even more so than probably what had actually happened. Anytime like something you're about to watch something, like you're like the third party in the room or a fly on the wall, like it always feels like it happens in slow motion in retrospect. Like you can't believe it just, I don't know whether
I'm
it's
sure it felt a lot
car
faster
accident.
to them in the car than it looked to me from across the line.
Probably, for sure.
All right. Well, those are the crazy things we saw this week. That was a good variety.
Yep.
Human rollerblading wrecks, cars flipped over. Lauren, did you have one?
No, I was just thinking either I need to
You
get
talked
out
about your
more
wheelie shoes.
to witness these things, or y'all need to start sending me yours on Instagram so that the algorithm has them appear more in my search bar.
Okay.
Anyone listening, send them to Lauren.
Yeah, send Lauren. Help her out.
It's so funny. I feel like,
Yeah, help my algorithm.
I used to have stuff like what happened to Brian happen to me all the time in public places. My mom used to joke that I was just like a magnet for like oddities and weird things happening. Like the space I took up was just like a weird vortex of things all the time. All the time. Like random stuff at the grocery store or like, yeah, it was always weird. And I would just I used to just like live comment about them on Facebook. But yeah, seen some weird stuff.
Interesting. Dark arts, Tommy.
Dark arts for sure. Dark arts at play.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for today. Big thanks again to Jelle Hoste for taking the time out of his busy schedule to talk to Lauren and Tommy. Brian, thanks so much for stopping by and sharing that article with us. If you guys haven't already, go to BeFriendlyFitness.com. Check out that article. Plus, you have the overall semifinal leaderboard up as well, which is sort of like that we used to do like a cross-regional comparison. Same principle here, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we did twofold on it. We did every semifinal athlete on an open scoring system, and then the games athletes only on a 100 down to 0 point scoring system.
Oh, cool.
There's some slight differences and nuances there. And then we kind of just qualified that that's not a direct comparison of athlete to athlete. There's a lot of nuanced differences that happen over semifinals, and we think that's important to recognize. But there are some big picture trends that we can take away from it. And so Mike Halpin, Barkley Dale, and myself each picked two. The first article has one of each of ours, and there will be a second article that has the second big picture trend that we think emerged based on the data from semifinals.
Awesome. So go check that out, BeFriendlyFitness.com. For Brian Friend, Tommy Marquez, and Lauren Khalil, I'm Sean Woodland. Take care of each other. Be better, and we will talk to you guys next time.